Well, let's move on to Emmanuel. We're talking about politicians lacking booster rockets. Let's move to a man then who, love him or hate him, has all the very things that we were referring to. That attraction, the making people listen, dusting himself down when the chips are down, getting among the people. It is, of course, Nigel Farage.
Tories have betrayed the electorate on what is the single biggest issue in terms of the impact on their daily lives. And I'm talking about their ability to get a GP appointment, the fact their kids can't get a house, can't get on a social housing ladder, can't afford to buy a house, all of those issues, infrastructure, traffic, you name it, the things that really affect our everyday life.
Yeah.
The population explosion is the biggest
So
single
this is
factor.
something
There it is. This is something we will never know what Mike Graham was going to say next. Eliot, now this is a man, of course. Yesterday he got milkshaked, which was not a pleasant thing. And I don't think anybody really wants to see politicians of any flavour being subjected to that. But this is sort of the cult of Nigel Farage. Daniel Hannan wrote a piece in The Telegraph today, referring to him essentially as a peddler of fantasy politics. Now, Dan Hannan, of course, is a Brexiteer. He's a man on the right of the Conservative Party, somebody you might imagine would be, a good bedfellow for somebody like Nigel Farage. But clearly not much of a fan. But there is a cult around Farage. It intrigues me in lots of areas of life, whether it's presenters, YouTubers that have sort of phenomenal followings because they say outrageous things, or whether it's politicians like Nigel Farage. What is it about him, do you think, Eliot, that has this curious attraction that is really not afforded to very many politicians?
I think there are a couple of things. I think on the kind of negative side, he has benefited from and still benefits from the ability to say things without ever having to be held accountable for them. He's never had to provide a solution to a problem. All he's had to do is to point to problems, and he's been very good at it. But I think on the kind of positive side, and this is the extraordinary thing about Nigel Farage, he's quite an establishment figure. He went to public school, he was a city trader, he spent the last 25 years really as a professional politician. And yet, he is somebody who is perceived by voters as not being like everybody else, that he has some kind of man of the people touch, in a strange way, like Boris Johnson, despite Boris Johnson's
I was just thinking
background. And I think one of the strange things about Farage is that a lot of commentators can't see him clearly because they're so influenced by their own views of him, whether positive or negative. And so they have to either, increase his importance and influence or downplay it completely. Yeah. Now, no question in my mind that he's one of the most influential political figures of the early 21st century. Correct. He brought us to where we were in terms of having a referendum. But at the same time, he's essentially a campaigner rather than a politician. And that's, I think, an important distinction, because he can say immigration is too high, people have lied to you, the country's falling apart, services are at breaking point. But no one has ever said to him, well, what would you do about it? Give me some details, and how will you implement this? Because that's not his role.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, if you go deeper into what makes these kind of figures, and obviously you mentioned Boris Johnson, and people will also draw a parallel with Donald Trump in many ways as well. Is it about, I don't know, in entertainment it's called the X factor, right? It's something you've got that you can't fully define. And that's the whole point. You can't necessarily fully put your finger on it. It's something in the voice. It's something in the delivery. It's maybe saying controversial things in a very casual but very confident manner. It's maybe all of those things. And then this kind of hidden X factor moment as well.
I think there's something in that point about confidence that, we saw particularly last night with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, that these are two people, but both of whom are at the top of their parties, who are terrified of saying the wrong thing. And therefore, they speak in very carefully modulated ways, and they speak in carefully crafted sound bites that they want to ram home. Now, what you see with Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson is that they're very much at ease in themselves, and they do speak very well because they have enormous inner confidence. I mean, they speak very differently; they have very different styles.
Sure,
but they have an ease and a confidence and a charisma fundamentally.
Indeed.
And as you say, that's very difficult to define, but you know it when you see it.
I've said that, I've told this story before. So I've known Farage for many years and interviewed him. We used to work together at a previous place. And he lives fairly near me as well. And a few summers back, I was down at the council, this is absolutely true, down at the council dump, dropping off my grass cuttings. And as I'm there at the skip, tipping over the grass into the skip, on the other side of the skip is Farage. This is like 8 o'clock in the morning. We both obviously booked an early slot. I looked across and I went, Nigel. He went, hello, dear boy. What are you doing here? And nobody else was around at this point. It was like quite empty. And we were sitting there having a chat for about 10 minutes, and then suddenly other cars started to arrive, and people got out with their, bits and pieces to drop off, the discarded wood and cardboard or whatever, the old IKEA shelves that are no longer needed. And you could see people gradually clock Nigel Farage. And it was like almost a biblical moment, because bit by bit, sort of a crowd started to gather, as it were, at the Sevenoaks Council tip. Who would have thought it, that even there, Eliot, Farage was able to, unannounced, command an audience of people dropping off their discarded toot?
Well, I think there's something in the fact that Farage, whether one likes him or loathes him, he seems pretty fearless, and he will talk to anyone. Again, that goes back to a degree of inner confidence. He's not worried about being wrong-footed or being put in a situation in which he's uncomfortable, which I think a lot of politicians are.
Yeah.
I think Farage will have a go and will wade into anything. And
Indeed.
that does give him an enormous power.